The first act of Heresy begins with Eris catching us up on some important details that help set up this episode. Apparently, Oryx slayed the worm god of secrets, Akka, and then forged part of its body into his ship, the Dreadnaught. Not gonna lie, that's pretty metal and what I would call a pro-gamer move. After defeating Oryx, the control of the Dreadnaught fell into the hands of another in the Hive Pantheon, Zebu Arath. I only vaguely recall her being mentioned a couple of times during the Witch Queen campaign, but in one of the seasons, Eris ended up banishing Zebu from her own throne world. That's quite the revelation, although I'm not too sure how that affected Zebu's power. The only conjecture I can come up with that makes any sense with the knowledge I have is that it's probably not too dissimilar from us Guardians losing our ghost. Eris has been keeping an eye on the Dreadnaught, and after all this time, it has finally gone awoke. This investigation is where we come in. Drifter and Eris make their way to Saturn's orbit while we return to the EDZ as an artifact from the Dreadnaught has landed there. A pop-up informs us that the dialogue lines for Zebu Arath and Sloane are missing due to the ongoing SAG afterstrike. Hopefully this situation is resolved sooner rather than later. I wouldn't be surprised if Bungie delays Frontiers based on this, something that is probably easier to do than to delay a new episode. We land in the Trustlands, which is not an area I've explored all that much. I've been here like maybe twice, so it's cool revisiting an area that isn't really related to the Dreadnaught at all. As we near the anomalous Blight, Drifter informs us that whatever landed in the EDZ is creating rifts into the Ascendant Plane. Eris clarifies that this means that the Taken have found a new leader. Zebu Arath seems like the obvious answer, but Savathun could totally be mucking up the situation. As the both of them near the Dreadnaught, they notice a strange phenomenon that the Drifter describes as it being skinned alive. While they land on the Dreadnaught here on Earth, I take care of a couple of Taken and their blights. Well, you slam that like button. As they land, Eris notes that this phenomenon is due to the Taken energies decaying the ship. The ship is carved out of a worm god, so perhaps it isn't as dead as we first believed. We reach the end of the tunnel and need to take care of some more Taken at the end of it. Unfortunately, some blights erupt and block us off completely, forcing us to take a different route. After dropping, Drifter notes that these Taken aren't ones that have been stuck in the Ascendant Plane, and instead someone is using the powers of darkness to create all new ones. Compared to the previous two episodes, it seems like whoever is in charge actually poses a threat to the system and requires some amount of, immediate attention. We reach the anomaly and find out that it's an anchor deployed from the Dreadnaught. I assume that this anchor is bridged through the Ascendant Plane because otherwise the physical implications are quite baffling. The purpose of this anchor is to try to take the entire planet, which is quite the plan. The stakes have definitely been raised, and Gorkal is its gatekeeper. The fight isn't anything special, but the Taken here are especially annoying because on death they leave a Taken soul behind, which explodes after a few seconds. By themselves, they aren't anything, but when combined, I get absolutely nuked. Or at least that's what I think happened, because according to the game, I died from misadventure, which doesn't make any sense otherwise. With Gorkal dead, we can make contact with the anchor. My suspicion about the anchor being metaphysical is confirmed as chunks of a bridge ripped from the earth help us cross the divide between us and the Dreadnaught. Ignore me just falling to my death. That never happened. This is a short little breather section that involves a bit of jumping. The atmosphere here is great and puts us in the mindset for what is to come. We take another subversion anchor and board the Dreadnaught. With that, we've crossed the space-time continuum and have caught up with Eris and Drifter. I take a few moments to appreciate my surroundings as the skybox here is fantastic. I do have to point out that it is a bit lower resolution than what I'm used to, so I wonder if it's the exact same one as when it was first introduced in the Taken King expansion. As we step further into the Dreadnaught, Eris and Drifter inform us that they've stumbled across a tablet of ruin. Oryx created these tablets to describe the process of how to take, but most are lost or kept secret. An ever-hanging plot thread. I believe that the last one we stumbled across was when we encountered Alec Hole during the Lightblade Strike. Some Taken ambush them while we deal with our own. There are a few sections that look withered and a bit more bony than the other sections, so I assume that this is to showcase the Dreadnaught stripped flesh. I don't know what it looked like previously, but I feel like Oryx would have probably kept the ship in a much better condition. In classic Destiny fashion, we're bamboozled by a couple of false entrances before having to crawl through a crack in the side of the wall in order to reach the Hall of Souls. We witness Eris and the Drifter deal with some Taken ads. Eris is then overtaken by a strange and foreboding presence. Before she's able to contact us, some Dread enter the fray. The Subjugator isn't slowed down by Eris' assault and rams its spear through her heart. A dramatic musical cue plays alongside the dropping of her hand cannon to mark her death. For some reason, the subjugator takes Eris's body with it as it descends deeper into the Dreadnaught. The Drifter follows. I have no idea if Eris is actually dead or not, especially since I don't have all the context given to us in previous seasons, but I do know that she hasn't had a ghost in years, so this looks pretty bad. Moments like this always confuse me though because of their disconnect from the gameplay. Like, how did the Drifter get cornered by some scions, and why did Eris just stand in the middle of the open area after noticing that she dealt no damage to the subjugator? Sure. It is interesting to see the Dread in the Dreadnaught though. They seem kind of like the Taken, where they need someone to lead them, which only makes us question who is in charge. I regain control of my character and fight my way to the large platform in the middle of the arena. Even though it's plausible based on our location, I don't think our Guardian actually saw the events unfold. I know it's not going to matter anyway, because Drifter will just tell us and nothing will have changed anyway. Regardless, once we reach the platform, we battle against Felghoul, the Requisitioner. Most of the ads here are whatever, but the husks continue to be a nuisance simply because they actually punish you for dealing too much damage. After the fight, we're able to acquire a Tablet of Ruin, which serves the role of this season's artifact while being important to the story. Drifter's fury is heard over the radio as he asks anyone for help. I'm afraid it's only us. And if I'm below a ledge, I'm basically dead, so I don't think it's looking too good. The more interesting part is Drifter calling Eris Moondust as a term of endearment. We reach the mausoleum and I'm instantly spooked by some giant taken eyes as our light is restricted in this area. Standing within their line of sight applies a stacking suffocating terror debuff. If it reaches 10, I'm almost certain I'll die, so I make sure that doesn't happen by hiding behind some cover. Some husks pile up in an odd manner, but direct us to where we need to go. As we reach the pit, we take note of the subjugator that executed Eris. Resident Knife, first of the Reshaped. It's protected with immunity shield while proceeding with some sort of ritual that we must disrupt. There have never been this amount of Grim and Husk in one area before, and when combined together, they are quite annoying. Our only objective here is to shoot some black orbs while not dying. I suppose this breaks the paracausal flow of energies, or something, but we are successful in disrupting the ritual. Realizing what we've done, the Resident Knife leaves. We revive Drifter and recover Eris's corpse. Drifter clutches her body and takes this moment to grieve. In a crazy plot twist, the game then reveals to the player that Eris is indeed alive. I'm glad that they didn't drag on the death of Eris until the final act, at least not to the player. This introduces a large element of dramatic irony into this story though, as everyone will act like Eris is actually dead, which, I mean, technically she is, based on the background and absurd amount of green. I assume that somehow Eris has her own throne world. Whether this is Xivu Arat's or her own is unclear at the moment, but I suppose Eris taking the place of Xivu makes the most sense based on the information presented to us at the beginning of the act. I do wonder how this is now going to resolve, and if Eris will have any long-term changes to her relations. Drifter is going to go through the whole gambit of grief before he learns that Eris is alive, if we even learn that by the end of this episode, which I assume we probably will. I wouldn't be surprised if he's completely accepting of this at the end, as his personality is pretty carefree, but I do hope he takes some drastic actions to shake up the status quo, because, well, he lacks this information. We return to orbit and Drifter talks to us. Eris supposed that this might happen at some point, and left behind some information for us at her apartment. I don't know why, but I just assumed that if Eris wasn't on the moon, that she lived in her ship or something, but sure. While this happened, I picked up the seasonal exotic Lodestar, just the first normal ammo trace rifle weapon, and has the gimmick of becoming a dull weapon with its scoped-in fire pattern shifting to a burst. I skimmed through the lore, and the rumination on the cultural shifts of the elements amongst the Lightbearers is quite interesting. Arc and Solar Light are seen as almost entirely positive, while Void was most associated with the darkness before, well, we actually discovered the power of darkness. In addition to Stasis and Strand, there are other speculative, yet undiscovered elements being saved to sell a future expansion. I'm not sure who the narrator of this lore is, but I speculate that it might be from the gunsmith Banshee's perspective. I also lay my eyes on one of the new episodic weapons, and the design language of stripped flesh revealing bone looks metal as fuck, and I am completely here for it. We fly down to the last city and can enter Eris Flat, which looks way more rundown than what I would otherwise expect. Conveniently, the door is left open for us. Eris went so far in her preparations that she left behind some words for all of the important characters. I do have to say though, it is kind of weird that this just auto-plays and that none of the addressed characters, besides us, are with us in this room. A lot of wasted words, huh? We take a moment of silence in order to mourn her passing, before interacting with the obviously out of place taken anchor just stuck in the corner of her room. It sure is there. We hear from Sloane, and for me, this might unironically be the first time ever, as she was not ever really mentioned in any of the expansions from Shadowkeep onward. Attached to the Tablet of Ruin is a quote from the Winnower. The world is not built on the laws they love, not on peace, but by victory, at any means. The possible implications of what this could mean is a bit beyond my scope of understanding, at least for now. Off to the side, a taken shader has been applied to our character model. For now, it seems like this power manifests in gameplay through our ability to control sections of the Nether. I do wonder if this will have some story implications though. I don't think it's going to go as far as us having a taken subclass, but some modifications to our power would be nice. After picking up the mission dossier, we return to the Dreadnaught. The quest takes me into the Nether Explorer activity, which is just a solo instance of the Nether activity. I'm not sure why it defaults to the solo version, and not the match-made version since the requirements for completion are just to clear the encounters and slay some enemies. There are 3 areas available for us to explore in the Dreadnaught, and which one you do first, second, and last seems randomized. I also think each section gets progressively harder, but you should check the wiki to confirm that. The first one we run into is the Tormentor section. Mechanically, this is the most simple section, as the way to disrupt the ritual just involves some ad clear. This then allows us to fight Lezrel, a version channeler. This is finally where I felt the gimmick of the Nether reducing the amount of health we restore, being 0, and when I had to actually use a healing grenade to heal me and not just for Rhinestone procs. The light is restricted after all, so I'm trying not to die. Luckily, the Tormentor's Dark Harvest doesn't just insta-kill us, and I assume that this is because we're in the Nether. Having an attack drop us to 1 HP, and us then not being able to restore it if we play safe would probably be a bit too harsh. After our victory, we can interact with a chest to pick up our loot, something that is plentiful in the Dreadnaught. Like, each chest basically gives you a drop, and completion gives you a bunch more, so I run out of inventory space quite frequently. This is probably a good thing. We also have the Nether exclusive choice of choosing a major boon upon encounter completion. These modify our runs in a pseudo-roguelike way. I think this is a cool system. I just think the buffs are simply not strong enough nor change the gameplay loop enough. To be fair, I am Isaac pilled on this specific point and prefer it when items have synergies and you can get some pretty unique runs through that. And to be fair, there is one specific boon that fucks it up, but not in the intended way. I'll get to that in a bit. The second encounter isn't that much more involved, but it does require us to stand on some plates while battling ads. This removes some barriers, which then allows us to destroy some taken clusters. There is a neat encounter here with the unique gimmick of an immunity shield swapping between 2 mini subjugators. Every time we push through a segment of their health, the shield swaps, and we need to damage the other shield bearer sentry until they die. Stuff like this is neat because it does change how you approach the fight by a little bit. We can also enter a Blighted Cyst. In exchange for a chunk of health as offering, we can open one of the loot chests. Neat. Kelrosh, Spawnkeeper, is an ogre boss. This fight does have the small mechanic of us needing to destroy the exposed taken clusters in order to remove Kelrosh's immunity shield. This fight was much easier than the Tormentor fight, although that could be fixed by me swapping what heavy I'm using for damage. The third area is the deepest section of the Dreadnaught, and a door marked with Hive runes blocks what I assume will be a location we can explore in the future. This is also where I pick up the ultimate bait modifier, Fragile Strength. The buff part increases all damage dealt, and the corruption increases all damage taken. This sounds great in theory, which is why I picked it up, as it should speed up combat and make each fight a bit more exciting. However, the problem is that we kind of already deal an insane amount of damage, so dealing even more damage doesn't really matter that much. The amount of damage we take though is increased by a rather ridiculous amount. Like, a single husk kills me with just 3 melee attacks. That's quite tragic. It also makes the fight against Hashon of Endless Horrors far more frustrating than it needed to be. To be fair, this did change how I approach the fight, so I guess the boon was successful in its intention, ? After inting a few times, I transcended, tossed out a nade, and then hard rotated a full 90 degrees before proccing bait and switch in order to deal damage. This did one phase the first half of Hashon's health, so it was good enough. In order to access the second phase, we then have to unchain Hashon by destroying the miniature blight points. In order to not die instantly, I did my best at utilizing the pinpoint openings to destroy these locks. Unfortunately, Hashon moves locations and makes my strategy infinitely harder by placing down purple traps. I almost died even through Song of Flame, but I managed to secure the win in the end. In order to sharpen our sword logic, Sloan invites us to the Dreaming City as an anchor has embedded itself into the spine of Caress. Her plan is for us to manipulate Taken power and use the anchors as a weapon in order to reverse the aversion back to the Dreadnaught. Quite the plan, and I like it. We also meet up with a model of Sloan instead of just hearing her over the comms. A small detail, but it at least gives us something to look at. The Taken eyes make their return here, and while cool, the amount of them just needs to be doubled. Like, I don't even have to try to avoid their gaze here. Sloan goes into how being Taken is all about self-control. I'll take that lesson in mind. This allows us to assimilate the anchor's corruption by ripping out its roots and absorbing some of its energy. Sloan says that we are not yet blighted like her, so it seems like this power has an official name. I'm interested in seeing how these powers manifest through gameplay. It probably doesn't need to be a full subclass, like I mentioned earlier, or go as hard as prismatic, but I'm hoping for something. I return to Eris Flat and read the Act 1 A Good Warnings text. Officially, we've begun to walk on the path of resolve. In order to continue the main quest, we need to obtain the Tomb of Want, which requires our reputation to reach rank 3. This simply requires us to complete another run. Drifter has some different voice lines this time around. Apparently, when we finish a Taken, they return to the Ascendant Plane. I might have known that information, but I completely forgot about it, so did I really know it? While traversing the Dreadnaught, I encounter Savathun's symbol. Interacting with it allows us to listen to a memory of Savathun from when she was still Savathuna. This one in particular is her convincing her sisters to travel to the deep to escape the God Wave, which we now know was just a part of the Witness's plan. While crossing areas, Drifter notes how multiple individuals were able to manipulate the Taken, himself included, as he does so for Gambit. This leads him to question, who asked for Eris's death? I speculated on this earlier, and Zivu was the obvious answer. However, since the Drifter is bringing this up, I almost wonder if there's some sort of fuckery going on and somehow Eris commanded the Taken to kill herself. After clearing the activity, we're able to listen to Drifter's lamentations. We're apparently the closest thing he's ever had to a friend, which is pretty sad. I guess Eris was more, and Elsie Bray is irrelevant. With that, week 1 comes to an end. Drifter lets us know that there's an absurd amount of energy funneling from the Dreadnaught to Savathun's throne world. Savathun is clearly up to something, and we even hear from Luzaku about this matter, although she's still out of the loop. We need to clear our way to Savathun's temple, and I will say that I enjoyed this act has us traveling all around the soul system. It makes the scale of the events feel that much more impactful, while also allowing us to revisit locations that are severely underutilized. Taken blights have corrupted the temple, and as we reach her statue, Savathun herself makes an appearance. Her ghost has been returned to her and filled her in on the current events. From Savathun's words, it sounds like she had nothing to do with Eris's death, although she obviously can't be bothered to care even in iota. She was especially adamant about us not interfering any further when it comes to the Dreadnaught though. Yeah, like that isn't even the tiniest bit sus. Also, she really just let us run all the way down here to then tell us to fuck off. She could have just done this the moment we entered the throne world, but I guess it isn't surprising that Savathun does not respect our time. Drifter contacts us right after, but it's not just through the comms. Our ghost finally got the new Traveler update and can cast a holo projection of the Drifter where Savathun once floated. He's still not over Eris's death, shocking, and encourages us to not listen to Savathun. No shit. Well, I guess Savathun could be doing some reverse psychology nonsense, but maybe I'm just reverse psychologying myself. Back in the Dreadnaught, Sloan tells us how Ikora reacted when she heard the news. This is one of those moments where we should have seen her reaction instead of it being told to us. I forgot to mention this, but there's a random event that, while in the Dreadnaught, the pylons go into overdrive, requiring us to destroy the blights, else we face a wipe. This is one of those ideas that sound good, but are just a waste of time. Perhaps if instead of this being a wipe, it was an optional difficult encounter that granted us even more loot, it would be better. At the end of my second Nether run, Sloan and Drifter have a conversation about Drifter's mental state, and Drifter's voice actor delivers quite the performance. Learning that his VA is Todd Habercorn resulted in one of those moments for real. Also, for sure, the writers were joking themselves off when they made Drifter say that he wasn't going to say that Eris is in a better place. Like, come on, you can't put the phrase in quotes in the subtitles. It's too obvious. Week 3 begins with us collecting 3 Hive dossiers. The Dreadnaught is a Hive system, and thus a biological construct, so we need biological passcodes, aka body parts, from high-ranking members in order to do anything with it. This takes us to the moon. We spend a few moments at the Altars of Sorrow and can pick up the Blade Navigator's head. In the Summoning Pits, we acquire the Lightsinger's hand. And in the catacombs, we shoot a few runes in order to remove the immunity shield before obtaining the cultist's hand. It's nice to see these locations on the moon again, especially since there's not really a reason to return here ever. With all of the codes acquired, Sloan instructs us to head back to the Dreadnaught. Inserting the appropriate body part into its respective lock allows us to hack the Dreadnaught systems to stop the deployment of the aversion anchors. The echo of navigation speaks to us after we place the wizard's head, and based on the context clues, it sure seems like this is the voice of Oryx. After placing the wizard's hand, we receive a coalescence of deep sky as the ship screams to life. Our mission objective now states, it can't be. We make contact with the Echo as a memory of Oryx reveals himself. The voice of Xivu, Arath, and Savathun herself soon follow. Interestingly enough, all of Xivu's voice lines are caps locked, so I take that to mean that she's shouting these lines at the top of her lungs. I can't help but giggle at the irony that the voice of Xivu Arath is completely mute though. The memory of Oryx was from when he first created the Dreadnaught, and so Xivu and Savathun fill him in. Xivu points out that if he fells his slayer, then his throne shall return. However, Oryx is a true believer in the sword logic and thus decides that if we were able to destroy him, then it is us that are in the right. I know he wanted to destroy all of humanity or whatever, but I can definitely respect him sticking to his principles. Savathun has seen the light quite literally and knows that they don't need to follow the sword logic at all. Xivu cannot accept this reality and vows to avenge Oryx at all costs. This results in her summoning her forces to eliminate our existence, forcing us to escape. I feel like I could just solo her entire army at this point, but we aren't given the choice. This sentiment is exacerbated due to the fact that none of the enemies here even deal any damage, so they're not threatening at all. This escape was complete freelo. With that, we return to orbit. The conflict and the ideologies of the Hive Pantheon have now been brought up, and I wonder what is to come of it. Oryx called us his hair, so maybe we become the Echo Bearer at the end of the episode. That'd be sick, but it's probably just going to end up in the hands of Eris. I return to Eris' Flat and deploy my ghost. The Drifter left a final message for us, as after this, he's going dark. Apparently, he tried something to bring Eris back to life, but it didn't work. The fact that he doesn't expand on what he tried to do and insists on us not asking him is pretty sus though. Like, seriously? What in the world could he have possibly tried? With the message delivered, he walks away, continuing to drift amongst the stars. With the stakes established, Act 1 of Episode 3 ends here. Like the rest of the episodes, all the first acts have started strong, and just based on the established stakes, this can't just not go anywhere, so hopefully Act 2 and Act 3 don't fumble the bag.